Good morning. This is Josh Scherrer, author of the novel 2020. It's good to be with you again today. I am going to answer a few questions about the chapter October. So, to begin, we are going to look at what Cherokee asks, who says, if they are running out of food, then why don't they, meaning Marlin and his dad, just go to a place to get more like they did the first time? So he alludes to this. He mentions this briefly in his journal at the end of the chapter, October, that Marlin isn't really for sure if the outbreak is over or if they are the last two humans on Earth. He's not really for sure either way. And so the best way to explain why they just don't go somewhere else is kind of like how we have experienced our own pandemic here in 2020, the actual year 2020. And that is, we get information from the outside world and we can kind of base our opinions on how well or how poorly the outbreak is going, the COVID-19 outbreak is going based on the information we get. But even then, we don't know if certain stores are open unless we actually call them. We don't know if Walmart, for example, has certain products in stock or not unless we actually call them or, we guess based on what they have online. So there's a lot of uncertainty today about where supplies or food might actually be. And so that's us in reality, and we have the benefit of having the internet and having radio and television, the news. Marlin doesn't have any of that because if you remember in an earlier chapter, he says that the news feeds, meaning the television, went out and they haven't been able to get it fixed yet. And he actually mentions the fact that they had considered trying to repair the satellite feed or the television feed in this chapter, but they determined that the ability of the parts just would not be there because the houses that they would search in, meaning the subdivision, would probably be destroyed. And to go out and search for those things, in Boonville anyway, was probably pretty risky. And going to somewhere else like Evansville or Henderson might equally be as risky, if not more risky. And, they've experienced a lot of loss. They've lost Tony. They've lost their mother. Marlin already doesn't feel very well in this chapter, so he's probably not that motivated to go anywhere. So a fairly long answer for a fairly short question, but I hope that explains it. Kayla asked, if Marlin could see Anna one more time, what would he tell her? I based Marlin and Anna and, all of the characters roughly, loosely on my own life and my own characters and acquaintances, family members that I know. And so if Marlin could see Anna one more time, if he could see Anne one more time and ask her her forgiveness, the reason why he wasn't with her to begin with is because he put his work ahead of his family. He said, no, I'm not going to go on vacation. I don't want to go. He was probably feeling irritated because his children were probably bothering him, because he was so busy with work. And so really, he only mentions his work at the very beginning of the book. He says, I didn't go with my family because I had work to do. And so it really shows you as we go through the entire novel, he doesn't really mention work ever. We don't really think about what his occupation or his career was because in the great scheme of things, what he does for a living really doesn't matter. What matters is his family, his wife, his children, his parents, his brother, his family, his friends. And so he would probably ask his wife for forgiveness, and then he would say that he loved her and that there was nothing more in the world than her and the children to him. All right. Giselle asks, why isn't he with his children and where are they? So he debates this back and forth throughout the book, and he mentions it again in October that he wants to be with his children, but at the same time, he is kind of stuck in this habit that he has, this routine that he has in Boonville with his dad. And so his children, as far as he knows, are with his brother. And the last that he had heard several months ago was that his brother and his children were all headed toward Alabama, where his uncle apparently had a farm. And so we don't really know if they made it or if they ever left Kentucky. Who knows at this point in the novel, but that's where he believes that they are. And so he believes, he has faith that they are safe. And that faith kind of keeps him in his routine. He wants to see his children, obviously, but at the same time, it's very difficult for Marlin to break out of that routine and that pattern he's put himself in with maintaining patrols and being with his dad. There's really nothing left for them there other than the fact that it's, in a way, safe for them to be there. And that safety kind of keeps him locked in position. So Jory asks, what is it that the characters are expecting to find and what is most likely the shambles of what used to be civilization? They are going to be desperate for supplies, vulnerable, and can get easily overrun by roamers or by a force of 3 to 4 armed men. They have little chance of actually surviving, and they should know it. And Jory, I think you are very perceptive in your comments and reflection. They are very vulnerable and they are very susceptible to attack. And I think that's probably one of the reasons, as the author, that I did not have Marlin and his dad go out on some grand adventure in search of his family, and they definitely were not, quote unquote, zombie hunters like you would see in a movie. It's one thing for them to attack roamers that are around the perimeter of their property, but it's another to take on this superhero status and go out and just slaughter zombies or, whatever like you would see in a movie. And that is because they are desperate for supplies and they're desperate for just this peace, just safety is what they really crave the most. And so staying on the farm, even though his children are gone and he doesn't know what happened to them, even though there's not really any thing keeping them there. It's just property, it's just land, but it's what that land represents, and that land represents safety and security, and Marlin has traded his freedoms for that security. Okay, so the next question is from Brianna, who asks, why did you make the dad talk to the son one day and be ignored for the other days? So that was just a little bit of an author's insight into the type of characters that those two guys are, Marlin and his dad. They have a very interesting relationship. We don't see it a whole lot because the book is filled with so much grief, but his dad is kind of I don't want to say funny guy, but he's kind of a comedian in a way. He has a strange sense of humor. And so his dad is probably very insightful and knows that Marlin is not feeling all that well. And so in a way, he's kind of pestering Marlin just to antagonize him. That's his way of showing affection in a way. And of course, I did base Marlin's dad off of my own father, who, he obviously was not that stoic and he wouldn't go for days without talking. But, he would kind of antagonize my brother and I as children just because that's what he did. It was all in good fun. It was harmless. There was never any malicious intent, but he was just good natured. And so that's why his dad chose to talk to him. There wasn't really any specific reason behind it other than that. All right, so let's see. Hannah asked, where did the mom go? So if you remember, he mentions his mother's pumpkin pie and how they don't have any desire to bake it. His mother died a couple chapters ago, And so this is a way for him to memorialize and remember her. And that's why he writes just briefly about her cooking and not so much about her herself, because he's just reliving memories at this point of who she was as a person and what she meant to him. So Jada asked, when people turn into roamers, do they change the way that they don't want generators or other supplies, or do they still kind of think like humans? In this chapter, it says that there's a very slim chance they find stuff, so could the roamers be taking it to use too? Jada, that is a very good question. We don't know exactly for sure how, human roamers are. We know that they still have human tendencies. If you remember the little boy who stole the cookie in a previous chapter, they still have these basic needs. But in terms of, mechanical or electrical skill, they're probably lacking because that requires a higher cognition in your mind. And from what we know as readers, the roamers seem to be inhibited in that cognition. That's why they don't recognize humans as humans. They recognize them as food. So Marlin kind of explains it a little bit in the chapter, but he says there's a slim chance for two reasons. One is at some point, there were probably survivors, and those survivors were a lot like him. He loaded down his truck as much as he could before he left Owensboro. And so people in a panic probably loaded down their cars and vehicles with as much stuff as they could carry before they left. So the chances of finding something useful is fairly slim because of that reason. But then you also have to keep in mind that when homes are unoccupied, it does not take very long for sort of nature to reclaim that house. That's why if you see houses on the side of the road that have been abandoned or not lived in for very long, the roofs will actually start to sag because the interior climate control is not working anymore, like the air conditioner and the heater aren't working. And so naturally wood will start to sag and bend, and it doesn't take very long for water to start seeping in. And once that happens, everything in the house is ruined. And so Marlin, knowing that some of those houses had been abandoned since probably early April, and now it's October, and there's a lot of weather that happens in between then, knows that a lot of those electronics, which are very sensitive, are probably at this point ruined. Okay, so Benjamin asked, my question is that they are thinking about leaving, but if they do, where would they even go? And so I kind of hit upon this a little bit ago. They don't really know where they would go. Would they, one, go just look for supplies, or would they go look for civilization, look for other survivors? But would those survivors react in a normal way, or would they be like the guy at the IGA, if you remember that character? Would they attack Marlin and the dad? Maybe it's almost a lawless society, or it's a society based on how many weapons you have, and that's who rules. Just because there's civilization, just because you're not a roamer, doesn't necessarily mean that you would be a good, welcoming person. So there is a risk to pursuing any of those options. And then, of course, the other place that they would probably go if they did leave would be to go down south to try to find Marlin's children and his brother. Now, whether or not they will do that, we haven't seen yet, but that's probably the most likely choice that they would go to. Okay, so Tabitha asks, what were some of the questions Marlin dad asked him? So I don't really know. As the author, I didn't really have a specific thought in mind. I just knew that character, that dad, would probably be pestering his son because that's a way to show that he is concerned about him. And so the more questions you ask, the more you force Marlin to talk, the more Marlin will battle in a way that illness that he has, whatever it is probably just a cold or something. But the questions themselves weren't necessarily that important. So as the reader, you are free to imagine whatever questions you want. Maybe he was asking about the weather. Maybe he was asking if Marlin had seen any animals lately, to hunt. Maybe he was just asking about the perimeter, or maybe he was asking about Anne, maybe he was asking about the children, maybe he was just reminiscing about the old days and asking questions about that. As the reader, that's one of those luxuries you have, is you get to imagine what the characters are doing when it's not explicitly said what they are up to. Okay, so Alicia asked, why didn't they go searching for ingredients to make Mom's pumpkin pie? It would make her proud to see them try, at least. I agree with you that, wherever the mother may be, assuming that Marlin and the dad believe in an afterlife, and as the author, I think that they do, they probably knew that they wouldn't do credit to the mom's cooking. Plus, they're still grieving. And so sometimes trying to do something that someone that's passed away always used to do is just too difficult for them to do. I'll give you an example. My dad used to always go do stuff with his grandfather, whenever he was younger. But then whenever his grandfather passed away, my dad stopped doing some of the things that he used to do. And I didn't really understand it as a child myself, because I was very young when my great-grandfather passed away. But I understand now that it wasn't necessarily those actual things that they would do together that my dad enjoyed. It was the time with his grandfather that he really enjoyed. And so once his grandfather was gone, the enjoyment of the activity just wasn't there anymore. And so, for Marlin and his dad, they might have enjoyed the pumpkin pie, the actual taste of it, but they really just enjoyed seeing how the mom was proud and happy to provide that treat for her family. And now that she's gone, even if they made the treat, the pie themselves, it wouldn't be the same. And, it just kind of depresses them, if you will. That's a good question. Okay, so Eric asks, a question for me is, will they ever move to look for a new place to stay? So October is a very short chapter, so I just encourage you to keep reading because the story will move forward, and it moves forward fairly fast from this point on. Chelsea asked, what would you do if you did find roamers once again? So if Marlin and his dad found roamers once again, I assume they would probably pick up their patrols. It's a short chapter because there's not a lot of roamer content in it. There's not a lot of external conflict going on. It's a lot of just Marlin reflecting on things. But I think in the back of his mind, as the author, I think that they know that things will continue happening. They just don't know to what extent. And as readers, we'll see that extent very shortly. Okay, Iana asks, why doesn't he just go try to find his kids, since the roamers have just kind of left? So, as I said before, I think that's an internal battle that he's having with himself, that Marlin's having right now, is he knows he needs to go find his children. He loves his children. But at the same time, he has this, it's almost this crippling effect of he has safety and security where he's at. And it takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of motivation, even though it's your own children, to go out, to lose that safety and security, to go out into the unknown and try and find them. Because, again, it's not even guaranteed that they are where he thinks they might be. Yeah, sure, they were on their way, he assumes, to Alabama with his brother. But, as we've seen throughout the book, things are not as easy as they used to be. So, going to Alabama already from Henderson, Owensboro, Evansville, Boonville area is about a 10-hour drive, once you get towards the lower half of Alabama. And that's today. And so if you are driving during an outbreak, assuming you can find a vehicle that runs and enough gas to make the trip. Roads might be blocked. There might be hidden dangers. There might be gangs running about. That's apparently how Anne got shot, was because of a gang. If you remember at the very beginning, there was a group of armed men on the other side of the bridge as Marlin went to Boonville, and that's why his generator got shot at, and that's why his truck got shot at, because they wanted to steal his supplies. So it's a very dangerous trip, and there's no guarantee that his brother and his children even made the trip. So he knows of that fear, and I think that fear is what keeps him from going after them. Okay, the next question is from Tyler. I understand that at the moment they feel comfortable where they're staying, but why haven't they already begun leaving? With winter approaching and their supplies running low, wouldn't it be better for them to leave now in warmer weather and with the supplies they have now, as opposed to being forced to leave in search of supplies that may not be there later and in colder weather? Tyler, that is an excellent question, and I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember, but surely you've seen it in popular culture, is the Oregon Trail. If you remember that game that was on PC and Mac way, way back in my childhood, one of the options was when you would start your journey. And so if you started too early, then there wasn't enough food for your ox. If you started just in the middle of the spring, then there were a lot of rains and floods and things. And if you started too late, then it would turn winter and you would get stranded in the mountains. And so even though this obviously isn't the Oregon Trail, Marlin, I think, is calculating his risks. And I think, like I just mentioned, the fear of the unknown is keeping him from going. It almost paralyzes him from taking any action. And then we don't really know about the stability, the emotional stability of his dad. His dad kind of seems okay some days, and then other days maybe not so much. His dad is elderly, and he's lost his wife. We don't really know if he could even make that journey. So there's a lot of unknowns that kind of keep them there, despite the fact that you are correct. If they left now, the farther south they went, the better the weather would probably be. But that the weather itself is not enough of a motivator for Marlin. Excellent point, though. All right, so the next question is from Michelle. And Michelle asks, how does he keep hope in the fact that his children are still alive and that they are safe? So that is probably the only thing. In fact, he mentions it in the chapter. He said, the only thing that is keeping me grounded in my humanity is my hope that my children are still alive. And that right there, even though it's kind of a one-off, one-liner of the book, that is really what the book is all about. Marlin is losing grips with his own humanity. That's kind of why the book has a dual meaning. The journey of a man faced with humanity's downfall. It's not just the downfall of all of America or the world. It's Marlin's own downfall, and it's not because he is a roamer. It's because he is losing sight of what's important. He's chosen relative security and safety over the possibility of seeing his own children. And, I think that's kind of where we're at. Okay, so the next question is Bethsy. My question is, are they going to stay in that house, or are they going to move somewhere else where they could also possibly find another generator? I think October would be a turning point, as you'll see here. I don't want to give too much away. I've kind of explained the reasonings why they have stayed so far, but we'll see what happens here in the next chapter or two. All right, so Nira asked, how long does the generator last? I asked because every time I look up, their generator stopped working. Yeah. Nira, that is a good question. So a generator is like any other machine, any other engine. It works indefinitely, works forever as long as you can maintain it. and keep it running. So a good example is, a lawnmower. So in my studio here, which, as I've said before, is also my garage, even though I'm looking at you and the camera right now, just beyond my computer, I can see my lawnmower. And so every spring, I have to change the oil, and I have to clean the air filter, and I have to do some other maintenance for my lawnmower in order for it to start running again. And if I don't do that, then the machine will not work, okay? And so for Marlin and his dad, they are not mechanics. They are not very mechanically inclined. In fact, they kind of hinted at that whenever they said that Tony was able to get the old truck running, even though Marlin and his dad had messed with it and couldn't get anything to work. Tony comes along and fixes it. So for them, the generator works as long as when they pull the cord, it starts running, and they keep gas in it. But, finding other supplies, or, if a piece wears down, or, if the filter gets dirty and they can't get the filter cleaned enough, or, whatever the case may be, there are a lot of things that can go wrong with the generator, especially if you are relying on it for regular power. And if you are not mechanically inclined and you don't have the right tools, it makes it very difficult to keep it running. So that's kind of the official explanation as to why they're always breaking down. But the other explanation is really because it is a piece of fiction. I use the generator as a plot device to sort of show a little bit of conflict that was not related to an internal conflict or to a Romer style conflict. It's just, man versus nature versus machine, right? So if the wildlife doesn't get you, the machines are going to fail you. So just kind of why they are used like that in the book. That's a very good, insightful question. So the next question is from Devin. If they lived in a farm and they grew stuff like pumpkins, why can't they replant and grow their own food? So they can, Devin, and they probably will. And so that's why he says they consider roasting some of the seeds. They would probably keep some of the seeds, but as winter comes in, southern Indiana, the ground will start to freeze up by the end of November, December. Well, at least it used to. In 2013, we still had snow. I don't know about you guys, but down here, we only had one snow the entire winter, and it was only about half an inch of snow. So that's pretty crazy for us. But normally, especially in 2013 when I wrote the book, the ground would freeze and you can't farm anything. You can't grow a garden until at least April or May. So hopefully they have enough food that they've saved up, that they've canned, preserved. But if not, then they're going to go pretty hungry until next spring. Okay, so Manuel asked, what happens to the roamers? That is something we do not know, and as readers. And I don't want to give away the next chapter, but the roamers will be back. Things will continue happening. David asked, what made you write the setting it is? So I chose this setting, and I've mentioned this in a couple of different videos, but a lot of this setting is based on my own experiences in my childhood and in my young adulthood, and up until whenever I wrote the book in 2013. A lot of it is based on my life, and it's an old author's trick of, if you are a new writer, the best way to write is to write about what you know. And you can put yourself and put characters that you know in real life, so they're not really characters, they're people, but you can create characters out of the people you know, and then put them in settings that you're familiar with. And so I mentioned last time about bluegrass here, which we saw in September. It's a real place. You can go fishing there. You drive down to, north of Chandler, Indiana. There is Bluegrass Fish and Wildlife area. You can go. to the exact spot that Marlin and his dad went to in the book. And I used that setting because it was an easy way for me to tell a story without having to think too much about the setting. Now, in future books that I write, I'm writing one right now, actually. It's set in space. And I have never been in space, and I probably never will be in space, most likely. So I have to do a lot more research about the realities of that environment in order to make a realistic book, okay? And so why did I choose the setting that I did? Because it's what I knew, and as a first-time writer at the time, that was the easiest way for me to get into the story. I'm glad you asked that question. Carissa asked, how do you feel knowing your kids are out there but don't know where or if they're okay? So Marlin mentions this as we go through the book, but I think he really feels horrible. But at the same time, and I've used this word already once in this video, but he feels paralyzed. He is so concerned about safety and security that it's almost taken over his entire mentality. He cannot bring himself to leave because he's worried that he's going to die. And so he misses his children very dearly. He loves his children, but he's kind of given them over to his brother to take care of, at least mentally at the moment. Carla asked, are they running out of food? Slowly but surely, yeah, they're running out of food. They haven't run out yet. They're not in any danger in this chapter, but the longer they stay there, they've pretty much picked Boonville dry at this point, apparently, according to Marlin. So if they don't successfully hunt for food or find a new place to get food, then they will start having to ration their supplies. Amani asked, if they don't see any more roamers and they haven't seen any all month, then why haven't they tried to make contact with anyone? If they haven't seen any all month, then maybe the roamers went somewhere where the people went back to normal. So Marlin does mention this. He's like, maybe the life is returned to normal in some places. We don't know, and they haven't been to Boonville lately. The places that they do go to, the gas station to siphon off gas, still looks the way it did back in May and June. But again, and I've said this earlier, you have to go back to the man at the IGA. Just because the roamers are gone doesn't mean the threat is gone, because humans are actually in a way more dangerous than roamers, because roamers are surviving. They are looking for food, and they are maybe protecting themselves, right? I don't think there's probably anything malicious about them. They don't seek out to hurt humans. They just attack them because they see them as a food source. But humans, on the other hand, they have malicious intent. Humans plot, humans want power, humans desire things. And so, going out to find fellow humans is not necessarily a safe thing to do, especially because Marlin and his dad have experienced that encounter at the IGA. So Cesar asked, why were they on their last generator? So I mentioned that before. One, it's a plot device. Two, they just are wearing them out. If I was to drive my lawnmower every day, it would wear out a lot faster than if I just mow the grass once a week. Okay, Fabiola asked, do you think that if you ever convince your dad to finally leave with you, he might want to go somewhere far, and probably somewhere like that maybe he always wanted to go, and finally be happy? It might motivate him to keep on moving with his son and won't be as scared anymore. So we don't really know how the dad feels. Everything is from the perspective, the point of view of Marlin. And so Marlin, in a way, kind of makes these judgment calls for his dad on behalf of his dad, and we don't really know what his dad is thinking. So maybe his dad is like, hey, we should go. And Marlin's like, well, Dad, I don't know if you can handle it. We don't really see that in the book, so we don't really know. But I think the dad probably would be willing to go if Marlin was willing to go. And from what we've seen in his writings, and as the author, I can tell you that Marlin is mentally not ready to go. Javon asked, why did you feel like yourself on the 30th of October when you could have felt yourself at any time? So, Marlin, after not having any encounters with the roamers and after reflecting on the anniversary of him and his wife, which happened, 15 days before, Marlin finally feels like, all right, maybe things aren't going to be so bad. Maybe we can get through this. But of course, he's very cautious about that, and he's not quite convinced himself that everything's going to be okay. Why October 30th? As the author, is the end of the month, and I wanted to end that chapter so I could begin kind of almost a part 3 of the book in November. Okay, Johanna asked, why don't they use pumpkin seeds to grow more pumpkins? So as I mentioned before, they will, but these were the pumpkins that they grew all summer long. So they probably planted them in May or June, and they harvested them in October. And now that they're harvested, they've got to wait to grow those pumpkins again in the spring. Maria asked, at this point, you never think to give up or just don't do nothing to survive because you think that nobody's going to help you? Like in the story, you say that you don't see anybody at the town, that everybody's dead, that you need to go out for food, but it's too dangerous, and almost all the stores are completely empty. So Maria, you bring up a very good point. Marlin never really says this, but his actions kind of indicate a different point of view than what he says, right? What he says is one thing, but what he does is another. So he says he wants to go find his children. He says he's trying to survive, right? He's doing the best that he can. But his actions, on the other hand, show a man that is scared, a man that is very reactive, not proactive, and a man that, in a way, has given up. He's kind of said, all right, my brother probably has my kids. They're all right. I miss them, but I'm too scared to go after them. That's what his actions say. So I think you bring up a good point. He doesn't say that he's given up, but in a lot of ways, he has given up. Okay, a few more here. Jayla asked, why did you guys debate to go outside if you knew the danger? So Marlin and his dad are always debating something, and I think that they will continue to debate whether or not to go places because there is always a risk. And we are seeing that on a larger scale play out here in the United States today with our own pandemic, our own coronavirus pandemic. Different states are opening businesses at different times. We've been kind of under this quarantine, this lockdown, self-isolation, whatever you want to call it, for most Americans since the middle of March or the beginning of April. And now we are seeing different governors in most of the states roll out guidelines for when people can return to a quote-unquote normal life. But with that, there is a calculated risk, right? Every time that you go out, you have a potential risk of contracting some sort of disease. And I say some sort of disease and not specifically the coronavirus or COVID-19 because viruses have existed for millions of years and they will continue to exist for millions more, right? And so even if you aren't getting the coronavirus, every time you go out anywhere or even in your house, there is probably a virus somewhere. That's why they exist so well, is because they are very resilient. And so anytime you do something, you take a risk. It's just that we have to figure out a way to calculate the risk and then reduce the risk. And so for Marlin and his dad, they're living in this world where they have to figure out what is the calculated risk, how much of a percentage chance is there that they could run into danger. And then the second part is, okay, so assuming that there's a 20% chance that we run into danger, how do we reduce the danger to ourselves? And for them, it's not wearing a mask like we do here in the United States now. It's let's carry a weapon, or let's make sure we have extra supplies so we can stay in our truck overnight if we have to. So it's all about taking that risk and choosing when that risk is necessary and when it's not. And that's why they debate whether or not they should go out. All right. Alejandra asks, do you think something is going to happen since the roamers haven't been spotted? I do think, Alejandra, something is going to happen. And we'll leave it at that. Gabrielle asks, do Marlin and his dad know something but aren't telling us because the tension between them is high? So, I don't think they're necessarily keeping anything from the reader, if that's what you mean. And I don't really know if they are keeping something from each other either. I think that they're just stressed and they're tired. And, they've known each other their entire lives, more or less. At least Marlin has known his dad his entire life. And so sometimes there just is this kind of weird vibe that goes on. And I don't think it's anything beyond that. Kylan asks, why is there only a certain amount of vegetables that they can grow? So, that's with any garden or anything like that. There's only a certain amount of food that you can produce. And considering that Marlin and his dad probably were not anticipating in April that there was going to be an outbreak at the beginning of April, so they probably did not have a bunch of seeds and supplies on hand. And so when Marlin went with his dad or joined, his dad and his mom in Boonville, they were probably relying on whatever seeds and other, gardening equipment that they could scrounge up, that they could find, because it was not a planned thing. And then finally, Alexander asked, was anything damaged during the drought where they were staying at? So the drought actually comes from an experience that I had whenever I was younger. We had a drought one summer, and a lot of the crops in our region died, and there was a lot of, just crop loss. There were a lot of, fire bans and all those things because of the drought. And so I put the drought in the story as the author because it is something that kind of consistently happens in this area in, Western Kentucky and Southern Indiana. But as far as the damage, there really wasn't any damage. And the fact that they were still able to grow a garden at all kind of indicates that even though there might have been a drought a little bit later in the summer, it wasn't that bad because it didn't wither or kill off the vegetables, which for the story is good. But it also, to be honest with you, is probably something that I would, if I was to redo the book, would reconsider how that drought, or near drought, as Marlin calls it, played a role. I don't remember off the top of my head who asked this question, but whenever the Molotov cocktail was used a couple times in the earlier chapters, they asked, wouldn't it catch everything on fire if there hadn't been any rain? That is a very good point. And then, if there is a drought, wouldn't it affect the garden? Those two things right there probably indicate that as the author, if I was to redo the book, even though it's a very small part of the book and not the main storyline, I would probably have the drought have more of an effect on Marlin and his family because it is an environmental concern that I just kind of put in as an element of the story, but not really as a driving force in the story. So it'd be interesting to go back and to re-envision that, if I could go back in time and rewrite it. So anyway, I think that concludes the questions for the month of October. We only have a few chapters left in order to get all the way through the book. So I look forward to the rest of your questions. I hope you continue to ask very insightful questions. You have been doing a great job. I've really enjoyed reading them and trying to come up with an answer to them. Some of them are very difficult to answer. And so until next time, I hope you all take care. I will talk to you all later.